The wind didn't howl, it screamed. It hammered the walls of Caleb's ranch house like 100 angry fists, shaking the timber down to its roots. Dust and cold seeped through the cracks, a fine grit that settled on everything. He stood by the window, his knuckles white on the sill, his rifle leaned against the frame, cold and ready. Rain came down sideways, turning the yard into a river of mud. The fire he'd lit at dusk was long dead, its ash washed away by the storm. And then he saw her. Through the slashing rain, a figure stumbled through his gate. Not an animal, not a ghost. A woman. She was missing a boot, her coat torn and flapping like a broken wing. She was hurt, badly. Lightning cracked the sky open, and for a single horrifying second, Caleb saw the slick glint of blood on her hand, clutched tight against her ribs. Then the darkness swallowed her whole. Caleb's blood ran cold. Nobody came out this far. Not in a storm that could tear the sky in two. Nobody, unless they were running from something worse than the storm itself. He cursed, snatched the rifle, and threw the door open. The wind punched him in the gut, a solid wall of cold, wet fury. He pushed against it, mud sucking at his boots with every step. She was on her knees by the fence, coughing up blood, her eyes locked on him. They were the eyes of a cornered animal, wild and broken. She whispered something, a sound swallowed by the thunder. "It's too late for me." He froze. Lightning hit again, so close the air sizzled, and the world went white. The thunder that followed wasn't a roll, it was a physical blow that shook the ground, but he reached for her anyway. She was light, too light, like her bones were hollow, like she'd already given up. He carried her inside and laid her on the old buffalo rug by the hearth. The fire was nearly out, just a few glowing embers. He fed it kindling and pine, and the flames roared back to life, hungry. She didn't speak again. He got a better look at her now. Her coat was in shreds. The skin underneath was a map of bruises, purple, yellow, and angry, fresh red. Her hands were torn, her nails broken. He pressed a wet rag to a deep gash on her side. She flinched but didn't make a sound. Her silence was louder than a scream. "Who are you?" he muttered, his voice low. No answer. She just stared into the fire, as if the flames were the only thing holding her in this world. An hour crawled by. The rain didn't stop. The tension in the small cabin grew thick enough to choke on. He poured 2 shots of rye, one for him, one for her. She took the tin cup with a hand that trembled so hard some of the liquor sloshed out. She drank it down like it was water. Still, she said nothing. He sat across from her, his rifle always within arm's reach. He wasn't a fool. She didn't look like a threat, but people this broken don't just appear out of thin air. They're followed. Trouble was her shadow, and Caleb could smell it coming. He'd buried too much trouble in his past not to recognize its scent. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was like sandpaper on dry wood. "They're going to find me before morning." He didn't ask who they were. That was the wrong question. "What did you do?" he asked. She just looked at him. And then a sound came from outside, not a knock on the door. It was a heavy scraping sound against the back wall of the cabin. Caleb was on his feet in an instant, rifle raised, his heart hammering against his ribs. He peered through a crack in the shutters. Nothing but darkness and the endless, driving rain. But then he saw it. A boot print in the mud right below the window. Fresh, deep, a man's print. And maybe another one just beyond it, already washing away. He turned back to the woman. Her eyes were still locked on him, hollow and wide. "Who's out there?" he demanded. Silence. The fire crackled, the rain hammered the roof. Then she whispered it, so low he almost missed it. "He has a badge, but he isn't the law." Caleb let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. His fingers tightened on the rifle. He knew that kind of man. The kind who used a badge not to uphold the law, but to become it. The kind who acted like God because they knew the real one wasn't watching. He didn't need her to say another word. I'm not dying for a stranger, he told her, his voice flat. She looked up, and her eyes met his for the first time. Really met them. Didn't ask you to, she said. Then she added, didn't say I wouldn't. And in that moment he saw something in her gaze he hadn't seen in a very, very long time. It wasn't fear, it wasn't hate, it was regret. The kind that doesn't come from getting caught, the kind that eats you alive from the inside out. He moved without thinking. He dragged the heavy oak table against the door, barricading it. He nailed planks across the windows, his hammer blows echoing the thunder outside. The storm raged, beating against his little cabin like a caged beast. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind sounded like approaching footsteps. She watched him work, silent. When he was done, panting and sweating, she spoke again. Her voice was clear now, cutting through the noise of the storm. Storms don't just bring rain, she said. They bring reckonings. He looked at her, then back at the boarded-up window. He didn't answer. He couldn't, because he knew she was right. He poured another drink, his hands shaking now, not from fear, but from a memory trying to claw its way out. Outside, a single crow shrieked, and from the edge of the woods, a voice cut through the wind, low and confident. Red Hawk, I know you're in there. Caleb's jaw tightened so hard it ached. Red Hawk. So that was her name, and someone out there knew it. The voice didn't come again. That was worse. Far worse. The silence that fell was heavy, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the low moan of the wind. Caleb crouched behind the barricaded door, every muscle coiled tight. The woman, Naomi Red Hawk, sat perfectly still on the rug, a statue carved from shadow and fear. He listened, just the rain. But Caleb had survived this long by knowing one simple truth. The most dangerous men are the patient ones. They don't charge in with guns blazing. They circle. They wait. They let the silence chew on your nerves until you make the first mistake. He stood, the floorboards groaning under his weight. He turned to Naomi. You know that voice? Her eyes never left the flames. I used to. We were friends. The word friends hung in the air like poison. Caleb scrubbed a hand over his face, the stubble rasping against his palm. This is your mess, Red Hawk. She didn't flinch, just a slight, slow nod. I didn't ask for your help. No, he said, stalking toward the window. But you collapsed on my land. That makes it my mess now. He peered through a tiny gap in the planks. The darkness was absolute, a wall of black. He heard her whisper behind him. You should go. Take your horse. Leave now. Head west. They won't follow you past the canyon ridge. He let out a short, humorless laugh. That's a big assumption to make about men who hunt people in a storm. They don't want you, she said, her voice rising just a little. They want me. Caleb crossed the room, snatched his empty glass, and refilled it. He downed the rye in one gulp, the burn a welcome distraction. You don't patch up a wounded wolf, he muttered, mostly to himself. Not unless you want it to rip your throat out come morning. Her jaw tightened. Then why did you? He didn't have an answer. Not a real one. Something in her eyes, that broken, haunted look, had made him act. But now, with a man who knew her name waiting in the dark, he wasn't so sure. He sat down again, in the same chair, the rifle leaning beside him. The air was thick with unspoken questions. Start talking, he said. From the beginning. Everything. She closed her eyes. She took a breath that seemed to cause her physical pain. I ran messages, she began, for the resistance, Navajo, settlers, anyone trying to fight back against the land grabs. You were a courier, he stated. She nodded. We were careful. We used codes, hidden drop points. We never stayed in one place for long. We operated out of a camp near Pine Ridge. Her voice cracked. God, we were so careful. What happened? I trusted the wrong person. She paused, and the silence stretched. I gave a map to a man named Elias. He was supposed to take it to the next cell, but when he got there, they were waiting. Who was waiting? Soldiers. Not just any soldiers. Ward Garrison's men. Caleb's knuckles went white where he gripped the rifle. He knew that name. Everyone in the territory knew that name. They wiped out the entire camp, she continued, her voice hollow. Fighters, women, children, everyone. Elias. He shoved me into a cave. He told me to run. He died holding them off. And now Garrison thinks you sold them out, Caleb finished for her. She didn't have to answer. Her silence was a confession of their accusation, not her guilt. Caleb leaned back. So Garrison isn't just tying up a loose end. He's burying the truth. If word got out he massacred a camp full of families, he'd hang, she whispered. He's hunting me to protect his own neck. Suddenly a new sound, distant but unmistakable. Not thunder. Hoofbeats, slow, deliberate, coming from all sides. They're closing the ridge, Caleb said, his voice grim, cutting off the pass. I told you, she said, her voice urgent. You can still get out. Caleb stopped pacing. He looked at her, his eyes hard as flint. I've left too many people behind to die already. The words dropped into the room like stones. He saw the question in her eyes. You lost someone, she stated. Not someone, he corrected her, his voice rough with old pain. Everyone. Just then, a new sound, a tapping, not at the door, at the rear wall. It was rhythmic. 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2 more. Caleb swung the rifle up, pointing it at the wall, but Naomi held up a hand, her eyes wide. Wait, that's a Navajo signal, a safe pattern. How safe? Only one person I know still uses it. The tapping came again. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps. Caleb moved to the back door, the small one he used for hauling wood. He unbarred it slowly, cracking it open just an inch. A man stood in the rain, his face hidden in the shadow of an oilskin hood. He was built like an old, weathered oak, with long gray braids and an eagle feather tied at his collar. Jonas, Naomi breathed from behind him. The man stepped inside, dripping water onto the floorboards. Trouble follows you like a shadow, Naomi, he said. His eyes flicked to Caleb, and the rifle still pointed at his chest. You planning on shooting the only man who can get you through these hills alive? Caleb slowly lowered the rifle. Jonas turned back to Naomi. You brought the storm with you. I didn't mean to. No one ever does. Jonas placed a leather pouch on the table. Inside were dried meat, herbs, and a handful of rifle cartridges. You've got until sunrise. After that, Garrison's men will stop being patient, and this cabin becomes your coffin. Caleb stared at him. How do you know their plan? Because I know men like Garrison, Jonas said. They don't yell until they've locked all the doors. Then we run, Naomi said. Jonas shook his head. No, running is over. He looked directly at Caleb. She needs a place the storm can't reach. You know the place, Echo Ridge. Caleb nodded. An old mining lookout. High ground, defensible. I can get us there. What's the catch? Caleb asked. Jonas stepped closer, his eyes boring into Caleb's. The catch is you protect her, no matter what. And if the past finds us up there, you don't hesitate. Naomi's voice cut in, sharp and low. You don't patch up wolves unless you plan to fight beside them. Caleb looked her dead in the eye. Then I guess I'm fighting. They moved with purpose, burning maps, packing ammunition, wiping away any sign they were ever there. But outside, in the storm-lashed trees, the shadows were shifting. They weren't just circling anymore, they were moving in, and they weren't just coming for Naomi. They were coming for all of them. The dawn came cold and gray, the storm finally breaking into a sullen drizzle. They were huddled under a rock overhang at Echo Ridge, the air thin and sharp in their lungs. The climb had been brutal, a slippery, mud-slick nightmare in the dark. They had made it, but they were trapped. Naomi stared into the small, sputtering fire, her arms wrapped around her knees. Jonas chewed on a piece of dried venison, his eyes scanning the misty canyon below. "We hold here for a day," Caleb said, poking the fire. "Scout the trails." Jonas grunted. "A day is a lifetime we might not have." "It's high ground," Caleb shot back. "It's the best we've got." Naomi finally spoke, her voice raspy. "They burned it all down, Pine Ridge." Both men looked at her. "You asked what happened," she said, her eyes still fixed on the flames. "You deserve the truth, the whole truth." She took a ragged breath. "There were 17 of us. Not just fighters, families, kids too young to even know what a border was. We were just trying to survive." Her voice trembled. "One morning I got a message. It came through our channels, all the codes were right. It was from Elias." "The man who saved you," Caleb said. She nodded, a single jerky motion. "The message said we had to move camp by sundown, that federal marshals were sweeping the area. We trusted it. We always trusted him." Her hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. "But the message was a lie. Elias didn't send it." A cold dread settled in Caleb's gut. "We were packing up, getting ready to move out, and then the fire started." Her words fell like stones into a deep well. "They'd set it in the supply tent. Oil, tinder. It went up so fast. We ran for water, tried to fight it." She looked up at Caleb, her eyes swimming with a horror he knew he would never forget. "And that's when the shooting started." Her voice dropped to a gravelly whisper. "They weren't marshals. They were Garrison's men. No badges, just long rifles and murder in their eyes. They shot anyone who ran from the flames. I saw children burn, their screams." She choked on the words, unable to continue. Caleb stood abruptly and turned his back to them. He didn't want them to see his face. He'd seen things like that in the war. He'd tried to bury those images for years. "I only got out because Elias tackled me," she said quietly to his back. "He pushed me down a ravine, broke his own leg in the fall. He made me swear I'd run and not look back." "And they think you sold them out," Caleb said, his voice flat. "Because I was the one who brought the message," she whispered, "and I was the only one who lived." Jonas tossed a twig into the fire. "Garrison didn't just kill a rebel cell," he said, his voice grim. "He erased evidence. If she talks, if she tells people what he did, he burns too." "It was never about me," Naomi said. "I was just the loose thread he needed to snip." Caleb turned back around. "I knew a man like Garrison during the war," he said, his voice colder than the mountain air. "Watched him hang 2 farm boys. Said they were spies. They couldn't have been older than 12. Jonas shook his head slowly. "He's not the law. He's the sickness that rots it from the inside." Naomi got to her feet, her face pale. "I should leave. I'm putting you both in danger." "Like hell you are," Caleb growled. "I bring death wherever I go," she cried, her voice cracking. "I won't be the reason you end up in the ground." Caleb stepped toward her until they were face to face. "You think dying alone out there fixes anything? You think that honors the people you lost?" Jonas stood up, his gaze sharp. "Ending this means finding the man who lit the fire, not hiding in the ashes and waiting for the wind to blow you away." Her face crumpled. "But what if I'm wrong? What if somehow it was my fault?" "It wasn't," Caleb said with a certainty that surprised even himself. "If you were the traitor, Garrison wouldn't be hunting you. You'd already be dead." Something shifted in her expression, the first flicker of hope. "We can't stay here," Jonas said, breaking the moment. "They'll find this ridge by nightfall." "We need supplies," Caleb said. "Ammo, a way out of this trap." "I know a place," Naomi said softly. "A woman named Mava. She runs a trading post 2 ridges west of here. She owes me a favor." Jonas raised an eyebrow. "Mava Crowley? The smuggler?" He spat on the ground. She plays both sides of every fence. Trusting her is like trusting a rattlesnake not to bite. It's better than waiting here to be slaughtered, Naomi shot back. Caleb grabbed his coat and rifle. We leave in an hour. He looked at Naomi, his eyes intense. Are you still running? She shook her head, a fire igniting in her eyes. No, she said, her voice clear and strong. I want to bury the men who did this. For the first time since she'd stumbled out of the storm, she looked like a survivor. The trail to Mava's was a treacherous path of wet clay and oppressive silence. Jonas led, his steps silent and sure. Caleb followed, rifle at the ready, scanning the dense tree line. Naomi walked between them, lost in a world of her own. Jonas suddenly dropped to a crouch, holding up a hand. They froze. Ridge ahead, he whispered. Wide open ground. A perfect place for a sniper. Before Caleb could react, a voice cut through the trees, sharp and cold. That rock you're hiding behind doesn't walk on its own, Jonas. A rifle barrel slid out from behind a fallen log, aimed directly at them. Jonas raised his hands slowly. Easy, Mava. You're even uglier than I remember. A woman emerged from the trees. She was lean and weathered, with streaks of silver in her dark hair. She held the rifle like it was a part of her. Her eyes landed on Naomi, and her face hardened. 3 feathers, she spat. I didn't figure you for a gravedigger. She jerked the rifle barrel toward the trail. Get inside, before the real storm finds you. Mava's trading post was less a store and more an armory. Crates of ammunition were stacked to the ceiling. Maps covered every wall. The only things clean of dust were the weapons. She slammed 3 mugs of black coffee on a table. You're a long way from home, Red Hawk, Mava said, not looking at Naomi. I need a route out of here, Naomi said, and supplies. I run a business, Mava said, her voice like gravel. Not a charity for lost causes. This isn't a lost cause, isn't it? Mava finally met her eyes, and the bitterness in them was a physical force. They burned down my brother's farm last year. Hung him from his own porch, all because he was smuggling food to your resistance. The confession hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I'm sorry, Naomi whispered. Sorry doesn't bring him back. Mava turned to a large map on the wall. You got 3 ways out of this canyon. One is suicide by ambush. The other is slow, and they'll catch you. The third path is through the old gulch. Garrison's men swept it 3 days ago, but they didn't go deep. They don't like fighting on foot. That's the one, Caleb said. Naomi looked at Mava, her voice pleading. They're saying I sold out Pine Ridge, that I betrayed them. Mava was silent for a long moment. I'll tell you this, she said finally. The man who gave you that forged message, Elias, he was my cousin. Naomi flinched as if struck. He came to see me 2 days before the fire, Mava continued, her voice low and dangerous. He was worried. Said there was a leak in the council, someone feeding information to Garrison. Mava took a step closer to Naomi. He told me he thought it was you. The air left Naomi's lungs in a rush. The world tilted, the room seeming to shrink around her. Elias, the man who died for her, thought she was the traitor. Caleb stepped forward, his hand moving toward his pistol. That's a lie. Is it? Mava shot back, her eyes blazing. You weren't there. You don't know. Naomi found her voice, a raw, broken whisper. No, he wouldn't. He saved me. Maybe he saved you because he loved you, Mava said, her voice softening just a fraction. And maybe love made him a fool. She walked to a dusty crate and pulled out a wrapped bundle. She handed it to Naomi. Inside was a worn revolver with a smooth ivory handle. This was his, Mava said. He left it with me. Said you might need it. Naomi's hands trembled as she took the gun. Doubt was a poison, and it was spreading through her veins, chilling her to the bone. What if Mava was right? What if Elias had suspected her all along? Suddenly, Caleb stiffened, his eyes fixed on the trail outside the window. a single rider moving fast. "Garrison!" he hissed. "We're out of time!" Mava moved to the back wall and pulled aside a stack of furs, revealing a dark, narrow tunnel. "This will take you to the gulch. Go. Now." As Naomi scrambled into the tunnel, Mava grabbed her arm. Her grip was like iron. "If I find out you were the one who betrayed him," she whispered, her voice a venomous hiss, "there is no corner of this earth you can hide from me." Then she pushed her into the darkness. Caleb followed, and the last thing he heard before the wall closed behind them was Mava's voice. Not a whisper anymore, but a broken, grieving cry. "He loved you, you fool." The forest swallowed them whole. They ran, branches lashing their faces, roots grabbing at their ankles, but they didn't stop. They couldn't. Naomi's mind was a whirlwind of fire and betrayal. Elias thought she was the leak. Mava wanted her dead, and Garrison was right behind them. She stumbled, and Caleb caught her. "You all right?" She looked at the ivory-handled revolver in her hand, the gun of the man who died for her, but thought she was a traitor. "No," she said, her voice hollow. "But I'm still breathing." Jonas, who had been scouting ahead, reappeared from the trees. He pointed down into a deep, jagged scar in the earth. "Echo Gulch," he said. "We make our stand there. Or we die there." Naomi looked down into the canyon, her jaw set. Her eyes were no longer haunted. They were empty. And in their emptiness, something cold and hard was beginning to form. No more running, no more hiding. One way or another, it would end in that gulch. Echo Gulch was a boneyard. The sun beat down, merciless, baking the red rock until it shimmered with heat. They found shelter in the ruins of an old mining cabin, a few rotted timbers clinging to the canyon wall. There was no time to rest. "We have a day, maybe less," Jonas said, spreading a map on a flat rock. Naomi said nothing. She was cleaning Elias's revolver, her movements stiff and mechanical. The poison of Mava's words was still working its way through her. "We don't just hold them off," Caleb said, his eyes scanning the narrow canyon. "We bait them, draw them into the kill zone." He pointed to a sharp bend in the trail. "Right there." "And then what?" Naomi asked, her voice flat. "Then we hit them with more than just bullets." Caleb looked at her. She hesitated for a second, then reached into her pack. She pulled out a small leather pouch. Inside were 4 thin sticks of dynamite. Jonas's eyebrows shot up. "Mava," she said simply. "She said if we were serious, we'd know what to do with them." Caleb gave a grim laugh. "She has a hell of a way of showing trust." "It's not trust," Naomi said. "It's a test. They spent the afternoon rigging the gulch. They set tripwires connected to piles of loose rock. They buried the dynamite under the narrowest part of the trail. They worked until their hands were raw and bleeding. As dusk settled, painting the canyon in shades of orange and purple, an oppressive quiet fell. They lit no fire. Caleb found Naomi sitting alone, staring into the growing darkness, the revolver resting in her lap. "I keep seeing their faces," she said without looking at him. "The children at Pine Ridge. Elias. They just stare at me, waiting." "Waiting for what?" Caleb asked, his voice gentle. "For me to admit it," she whispered, the words tearing from her throat. "That I lived. That I was the one who carried the message that killed them all. It doesn't matter if I knew. I was the weapon. I was the leak." Caleb was silent for a long time. "The dead walk with us, Naomi," he said finally. "Everything we've lost, everyone we've failed, they're always there. You can't outrun them." He looked at her, his own past a heavy shadow in his eyes. "But maybe you can learn to walk ahead of them." Her breath hitched. "I don't know how." "You just have to stand your ground when it counts," he said. "And tomorrow, we stand." She looked at him, and in the twilight he saw not a broken woman, but a warrior steeling herself for one last battle. "Tomorrow," she agreed, "we stand." The morning came, still and hot. The air itself felt like it was holding its breath. Jonas saw them first, a dust cloud on the far ridge. "They're here." Caleb climbed to a high ledge, spyglass in hand. 7 riders. At the front was a broad-shouldered man in a long coat, Ward Garrison. He looked just as Caleb remembered from the war, arrogant, unflinching, cold. "He brought more than I thought," Caleb said, climbing back down. 7 of them. Jonas grunted. "Still doable, if they're stupid." Naomi checked the wires on the dynamite one last time. Her hands were steady now. The doubt, the guilt, it was all gone, burned away and replaced by a cold, hard resolve. The riders entered the gulch. They moved slowly, cautiously. Garrison's voice echoed off the canyon walls. "Red Hawk, you're out of room to run. Come on down, and we can end this with dignity." Naomi didn't move a muscle. The lead horse stepped onto the narrow bend, its hoof pressed down on the buried trigger. Caleb gave the signal. The world exploded. The dynamite tore the silence to pieces, sending rock and dirt and men flying. The deadfall traps triggered, and a river of boulders crashed down from the canyon walls. It was chaos. Screaming horses, choking dust, the sharp crack of rifle fire. Naomi stood, firing Elias's revolver with deadly calm. Jonas provided cover fire from the rocks. Caleb picked off a rider trying to flank them. But Garrison was smart and fast. He rolled behind a rock, firing blindly into the smoke. His men were scattered, bleeding, confused. Then, through a momentary gap in the swirling dust, Caleb saw it. Garrison locked eyes with Naomi, and he smiled. Before anyone could get a clear shot, he slipped backward into a narrow crevice in the canyon wall and disappeared. "He's gone!" Naomi yelled, her chest heaving. Caleb shook his head, a cold dread washing over him. "No," he said. "He's not gone." Jonas limped over, a dark stain spreading on his thigh. "Then this ain't over." Garrison was a cornered wolf, wounded and alone. But that didn't make him less dangerous. It made him more so. And as Naomi looked at the crevice where he had vanished, she knew it too. He wasn't retreating. He was leading them into the final trap. The silence that followed the ambush was eerie. The dust settled, revealing the carnage. They had won the battle, but Garrison was still out there, somewhere in the labyrinth of rocks. And he was hunting them now. "He's drawing us in," Jonas said, tying a strip of cloth tightly around his wounded leg. "This is his ground now." "Let's finish it," Naomi said, her voice devoid of emotion. She reloaded the ivory-handled revolver, her movements precise and cold. They followed his trail, a sparse path of blood droplets on the red rock. The trail led them higher, into a narrow pass that wound its way to the top of the ridge. The air grew thin, the sun relentless. And at the top, they found him. He stood beside a twisted, dead cedar tree, his rifle held loosely in one hand. His coat was torn and blood stained his shoulder, but he stood tall, his posture unwavering. He looked calm. "You lost, Garrison," Naomi said, stepping forward. He gave a small, chilling smile. "No," he replied. "I just trimmed the fat." He looked her up and down, his eyes filled with a strange kind of pity. "You still don't get it, do you?" She raised the revolver. "It's over." "You're not a killer, Naomi," he said softly. "I'm not running anymore," she replied, her voice steady. He raised his rifle. So did Caleb, a standoff under the blistering sun. Garrison's gaze shifted to Caleb. "You, McGrow. I'm surprised. I thought you were smarter than to get mixed up in this." "I know what you did at Pine Ridge," Caleb said, his voice like steel. "You know what she told you," Garrison countered. "She handed over the map that got her own people killed, children." Naomi's hand trembled for just a second. "You forged the message that sent them there," Caleb shot back. Garrison's calm finally cracked. A muscle twitched in his jaw. "She still carried it. She still led them to the slaughter." He took a step forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But you want to know the real secret? The one that's been eating at you?" He looked directly at Naomi. "Elias knew. He knew you were the leak." The world seemed to stop. "That's a lie," Naomi breathed. "Is it?" Garrison taunted. "Why do you think he sent you away? Why do you think he stayed behind to die? It wasn't to save you, Red Hawk. It was penance. He was cleaning up his own mess. He loved a traitor, and he paid for it with his life." Everything Mava had said, every doubt that had festered in her mind, it all came rushing back. The poison was overwhelming. Garrison saw it in her eyes. He saw her breaking, and he smiled. "She's not yours to save, McGraw," he said. "She was never anyone's to save." That's when he fired. The shot went wide as Caleb tackled Naomi to the ground. Caleb returned fire, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Garrison scrambled behind the cedar tree, but Naomi was already moving. Fueled by a rage so pure and white-hot it burned away all her fear and doubt, she ran. She knew where he would go. The ridge looped around to a small dead-end bluff. She cornered him there. He was crouched behind a rock, clutching his bleeding shoulder. He looked up at her, and the smugness was gone, replaced by a flicker of genuine fear. "You're not going to do it," he gasped. "You carry death, Naomi," he pleaded. "You don't deliver it." She stepped closer, the ivory-handled revolver feeling like an extension of her own arm. She aimed it directly at his heart. "I used to believe that," she whispered. "But ghosts don't get second chances." She pulled the trigger. Click. The sound was tiny, but it echoed like a cannon shot. Garrison's eyes went wide with shock. She pulled the trigger again. Click. The chamber was empty. The gun Mava had given her, the gun that belonged to Elias, had been empty all along. It wasn't a weapon. It was a message. Behind her, Caleb's voice was quiet, but firm. "Lower the gun, Naomi. He's done." She turned. Caleb stood a few feet away, his rifle lowered. He looked at her not with judgment, but with a deep, sad understanding. "Let the law hang him," he said. "Let the truth be the thing that ends him. Not you." Slowly, painfully, she let the revolver fall from her hand. It clattered on the rocks, the sound of a war finally ending. She knelt beside the cowering Garrison, reached into his coat, and pulled out a leather satchel. Inside were his written orders, letters, and a coded ledger. Proof. Everything they needed. When they returned, Jonas was waiting. "Is it finished?" "Not how we thought it would be," Caleb replied. He tossed the satchel to Jonas, who whistled low as he scanned the contents. Naomi sat by herself, staring at the stars beginning to appear in the twilight sky. Caleb sat beside her. "You had the shot," he said. "I know." "You didn't take it." "I couldn't," she whispered. "The gun, it was empty." Caleb nodded slowly. "Sometimes a choice is made for us, but you still have to be the one to live with it." He looked at her, his gaze steady. "Mava didn't give you a weapon. She gave you a choice between revenge and justice, and you chose right." She looked at the empty revolver, then back at him. For the first time, the storm in her eyes began to clear. The canyon was quiet. Not a peaceful quiet, but the heavy waiting silence that comes after a fever breaks. They had Garrison tied and gagged, his eyes burning with an impotent fury. Naomi couldn't stop looking at the empty revolver. It had all been a test. Mava, consumed by her own grief, had sent her on a path to either destroy herself with revenge or find a different way forward. Elias hadn't suspected her. He'd been trying to protect her, even from beyond the grave. The twists of the past few days were a dizzying knot in her mind. She finally stood and walked over to Garrison. She crouched in front of him, her eyes searching his. "Why?" she asked, her voice raw. "Why Pine Ridge? They were families." He just glared at her. "Why kill Elias?" His lips moved, a sneer forming. Because your little resistance was winning, he finally spat, the words muffled by the gag Caleb had loosened. You were uniting people, giving them hope. Hope is more dangerous than any army. It had to be crushed. Elias was a loose end. He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. And he was a fool who loved a woman who was leading his people to their doom. Caleb took a step forward, his fist clenched, but Naomi held up a hand. She looked at Garrison, not with hate, but with a sudden, startling clarity. You think truth doesn't save anyone, she said. She walked to her pack and pulled out a small, rust-covered object Mava had slipped in with the dynamite. A primitive audio recording device. She pressed a button. Garrison's own voice filled the canyon, confessing everything. Because your little resistance was winning. The color drained from his face. He hadn't just been talking to her. He'd been talking to the future. It's done now, Caleb said. Naomi shook her head, holding up the recorder. No, she said. Now it begins. 2 days later, they rode into the dusty outpost at Red Mesa. They handed the satchel and the recorder to a stunned telegraph clerk. The man's hands shook as he read Garrison's orders and listened to the confession. I'll get this to the territorial governor in Santa Fe, he stammered. As they walked back outside, the wind kicked up, tugging at Naomi's coat. Feels like another storm, Caleb said, squinting at the sky. Naomi looked back at the outpost. No, she said. This feels like justice. That night they camped under the stars. The weight of their journey had finally settled. I keep thinking, Naomi said, staring into the campfire, if I had just done one thing differently, maybe Elias would still be alive. Caleb looked into the flames. That, maybe, never goes away, he said softly. The guilt doesn't disappear, but it gets lighter if you carry it for the right reasons. He poked the fire, sending a shower of sparks into the night. You scream a lie into a canyon, and all you get back is noise. But the truth echoes. You can't bury it. You can't hide from it. It just keeps coming back, clearer every time. She looked at the recorder, at the proof that would finally clear her name and honor the dead. And for the first time in a long time, she exhaled, and it didn't feel like pain. It felt like release. Dawn broke, painting the desert in shades of gold and rose. Before they rode on, Naomi found a spot beneath a lone piñon tree. She knelt and dug a small hole in the dry earth. She placed Elias's empty revolver inside. Next to it, she placed Garrison's broken badge, which she'd pulled from his coat. She whispered a final goodbye, and then she covered them with dirt, burying the past. As they saddled the horses, Jonas stretched. So, where to now? Caleb looked at Naomi. She looked north, toward the distant mountains, toward a future she hadn't allowed herself to imagine. It wasn't about running anymore. It was about moving forward. Weeks later, the story had spread like wildfire. A corrupt lawman brought down by his own words. A massacre avenged. A woman called Red Hawk who had walked through fire and come out the other side. Not clean, but whole. Trials were held. Names were cleared. A new stone was carved at Pine Ridge, with the name Elias Redhawk at the very top. And somewhere, far to the north, Naomi dreamed not of fire or of running, but of the quiet strength in carrying on. Some stories end with a gunshot. Some end with a hanging. But the best ones, the ones that truly matter, they end with a choice. The choice to bury what weighs you down, carry what makes you stronger, and to keep breathing, no matter how many storms try to snuff you out. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales from the shadows of history.